Good evening and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum at the Institute of Politics. My name is Angelina Lee and I'm a second year studying history of art and architecture and economics at the college, and I'm a member of the JFK Jr. Forum Committee. Before we begin, please note the exit doors, which are located on both the park side and the JFK Street side of the forum. In the event of an emergency, please walk to the exit closest to you and congregate in the JFK Park. Please also take a moment now to silence your cell phones and join me in welcoming Senior Practice Fellow in American Democracy at the Ash Center and CEO of Republic Affairs, Stephen Richer, and Harvard College undergraduate, Tucker Combs.
All right. My name is Stephen Richer. As mentioned, I'm a senior fellow at the Ash Center here at Harvard Kennedy School. And before we begin, I should say that neither Tucker nor I knew about the MLB schedule prior to this event. So this is no slight on the Red Sox. We promise you that.
That's very true. My name is Tucker Combs. I'm a sophomore here at the college studying government.
All right. So if you haven't lost an election before, I highly recommend the experience, actually. It teaches you a lot. It teaches you humility. It teaches you resilience. It teaches you professionalism. And it teaches you leadership. And it also makes you feel really freaking popular for a little bit. The day after I lost my bid for re-election in 2024, it felt like everyone called me. Potential donors who had never called me were calling me in sympathy, former colleagues, even a former girlfriend who had avoided my communications for years. But probably the two most important phone calls that I received on that Wednesday after Election Day, were from Archon Fung, our speaker tonight, Professor Archon Fung, and Vice President Mike Pence. Professor Fung invited me to join the Kennedy School community, and Tucker is going to introduce him, but it has been a real privilege and pleasure being here this year with all of you. The call from Vice President Mike Pence was especially meaningful. He is one of my heroes. I had sacrificed friends and political alliances when, as an elected Republican overseeing elections in Arizona, I said that the 2020 election was not stolen. More than anyone in the United States, Mike Pence had shown me the path that I chose to walk, a path that I hoped to be of truth, of integrity, and of constitutional fidelity. But even before his actions in 2021, Vice President Mike Pence lived a truly epic life. He has been a lawyer, a talk show host, 6-term congressman, and he was the 50th governor of Indiana, where he focused on tax reform, job creation, education, and infrastructure investment. And of course, in 2016, he was elected 48th Vice President of the United States. In recognition of Vice President Pence's public service, his commitment to this country and our Constitution, he was awarded the Profile and Courage Award earlier this year from John F. Kennedy Presidential Library, one of the highest honors in the country. And so it's only fitting that he's here with us now at the Kennedy School. Vice President Pence continues to champion Ronald Reagan conservatism as the founder of the policy organization Advancing American Freedom, and he will join the faculty of George Mason University this spring. Welcome, Vice President Pence.
Tonight's conversation will be moderated by Professor Archon Fung. Professor Fung directs the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation and is the Winthrop Laughlin McCormick Professor of Citizenship and Government at the Harvard Kennedy School. He examines policies and practices that aim to deepen democracy, especially through public participation, deliberation, and transparency. His books include Empowering Affected Interest, Democratic Inclusion in a Globalized World, Full Disclosure, The Perils and Promise of Transparency and Empowered Participation, Reinventing Urban Democracy. The Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation has co-sponsored tonight's discussion, and we want to extend our thanks to their team at the Ash Center, and in particular, Melissa Danello for her help bringing this event together. So now, let's give her a hand. Thank you. So now it is our privilege and honor to introduce to you the 48th Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, and Professor Fung.
Thank you, sir. All right, before we begin, I just want to remind folks about HKS policies regarding speech and dissent. It is important that speakers be able to speak, that everybody in the audience be able to hear them, and that there be plenty of opportunity for questions during the Q&A period and even protest, so long as it does not disrupt our event. With that out of the way, let me say how much of an honor it is to welcome you to the Harvard Kennedy School and to Harvard University tonight. I'm really delighted. Now, Vice President Pence, you may not know, but I do want to alert you to the fact that your political positions may not be the same as the average of the Harvard faculty or the Harvard student body. I hope that doesn't come as a surprise. Seriously, this is a wonderful opportunity to explore perspectives and positions and policies across different political positions, and I know that we'll all learn an enormous amount from that exchange. So, the first area that I would like to explore.
Can I say thank you?
Oh, yeah. Please.
How about a round of applause for Professor Fung? I just appreciate so much the opportunity to be here. Thank you for the warm welcome to the entire faculty of the Institute of Politics. It's very humbling to be here at the Kennedy School. Growing up in a small town in southern Indiana, I would tell you the namesake of this school was one of the heroes of my youth, and still is to this day. As I was in my last trip to Boston a few months back, to be in any way associated with his legacy was a great honor. And I see that as a continuation tonight, and I'm very, very grateful for the hospitality. And I'm grateful especially for the students who are here. I just finished auditing a class with my friend, Governor Eric Holcomb, who recently joined the Harvard team. He just finished 8 years as governor of Indiana, and other than the fact that he broke all of my records in job creation, there's not a thing I don't like about him. So join me in thanking Governor Eric Holcomb for being a part. But I just want to also echo, I just think in these divided times, it's maybe more obvious to more Americans that we all got to start listening to each other a little bit better. In a very real sense, I hope my presence here today and the time that I've spent on campuses over the last 4 years is emblematic of how deeply I feel that. And I just want to thank you and everyone at the Harvard Kennedy School for continuing that great tradition.
Yeah, well, we're deeply grateful for your time and for your investment in the American conversation. The first area that I want to explore is religion and public life. And I wanted to start there because religion has been a very important part of your private life, but then also your public life. I think universities and college campuses are often characterized as secular, and that's, I think, not unfair. People have religion, at least in the liberal tradition in which I was taught, religion was something for your private life, but not for your public life. And so I wanted to explore that. First. So in an essay that you published just this summer, and I recommend it to everyone, titled Rediscovering Order in an Age of Populism, and we'll be coming back to that essay. I think it's really wonderful. You cite favorably Russell Kirk, and he says, quote, "Practical government in the United States and in every other nation is possible only because most people in that nation accept the existence of some moral order by which they govern their conduct, the order of the soul." Now, what do you have in mind by that agreed upon moral order, and how does it relate, in your view, in America, to Christianity?
Well, Professor, thanks. I think I understand most of that question. Let me say thank you for, I've often said over the course of my career, I'm a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order. For me, I grew up in a wonderful Catholic family in a small town in Indiana, but I will tell you, when I got to be about the age of some of the young people here, I lost interest in religion. I just walked away from, I didn't walk away from the church, I walked away from faith entirely. I thought religion was fine, some people need it, I just didn't. But But by the time I got off to college at a little school that we call the Harvard of the Midwest, it's our alma mater, little school right on the Ohio River, I met some people that didn't talk to me about religion. They just said they were Christians. They talked about having a personal relationship with God through Jesus Christ. And I was intrigued by that. I had always thought of religion as a group thing, that you were a part of something. I never thought of it as personal to me. And over the course of my freshman year, I spent some time in Bible studies and devotions, and I took a great interest in the authenticity of their faith. And I made a decision at a contemporary Christian music festival in a little town called Wilmore, Kentucky in 1978 to put my faith in Jesus Christ and change my life forever. And the way that it's impacted my life, beyond Russell Kirk's profound eloquence, I hope first and foremost is the way that I have over time learned to put my faith into practice in the way I deal with other people. Mayor Steve Goldsmith, who's no stranger to the Harvard community, is here. He's known me long enough to know that wasn't always true in my life. Even though I'd come to a personal Christian faith that challenges me to do unto others as I would have them done to me, right? When I first got into politics in my late 20s, I kind of set those values aside and got involved in the kind of negative personal attack campaigns that are actually much more common in politics today. But when it was all over, after 2 unsuccessful runs for Congress, I felt convicted in my heart that I hadn't lived up to not a political goal, but I hadn't lived up to what my faith required of me. I treat others the way I want to be treated. And I sat down and I penned an editorial that ended up being published all over Indiana entitled Confessions of a Negative Campaigner. And I came to the conclusion that campaigns ought to first demonstrate the decency of the candidate. You ought to treat others the way you want to be treated. Secondly, I think campaigns ought to be about something more important than your election, issues affecting the community, the state, the nation. And then finally, they can be about winning. I said if I ever had a chance to go back to politics, I would set aside negative personal attacks, and I would try and focus on the issues facing the country. And so I would hope, although my faith has informed me on some core issues, like my deep belief in the sanctity of human life, I hope the greatest impact my faith has had on my career is the way I've tried to live out a respect for people, whether we agree or disagree. I hold the view that democracy depends on heavy doses of civility. It's one of the reasons why, if you're in Congress, and I know sitting here at Harvard, a fair number of people in this room probably will be someday. But if you're in Congress, there's these rules where you have to say, you know, will my friend from Massachusetts yield? Or will the gentle lady from Idaho accept an amendment? There's these formal ways of talking to one another. Yeah. And I think it's because, going all the way back in the great Western tradition, people understood that democracy depends on heavy doses of civility. That when we're civil to one another, even when we disagree, we have the opportunity to find common cause, not compromising principles or core values, but actually finding ways that we can work together and advance the country. So I hope that's the way my faith has most affected my career in life.
Yeah, that's really important, that faith leads you to a certain kind of conduct in politics that would be beneficial for democracy. And I completely agree and applaud you for that. I want to push just a little bit more. And it relates to the respect for life and the sanctity of life, but I don't really want to go there. I want to ask the extent to which you think public policy should be related to your religion. So somebody like Senator Hawley from Missouri, I think, favors a set of public policies that would support his view of what Christian life and Christian society should be, what family life should be like, what fertility policy should be like. And so do you kind of sign on to that view, that if you can get enough votes, then it's okay to incorporate into law and public policy your view of Christianity. And then how would you respond to people who don't see Christianity that way, or hold a whole nother religion, or perhaps no religion at all?
Well, for me, the place we always go on these questions is the founding documents of the country.
Okay.
I just visited the National Archives 2 weeks ago. And if you got time for a road trip, the first time in American history, the entire Constitution is on display right now in Washington, D.C. And so is the Declaration of Independence. And my belief is, in answer to your question, you need go no further than the First Amendment.
Okay.
The Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. There's not. The founders was overwhelmingly a Christian nation in the beginning. In fact, many of the 13 original colonies that fought and won the Revolution, now almost 250 years ago, had state-sanctioned religions for those states. But the founders said, not at the federal level. That won't happen. We will not establish a religion or prohibit the free exercise thereof. And so I think that answers your question.
Okay. But
going back to your other question, I had time to think about it, so I might actually have an answer to your first question. For me, that what Dr. Kirk and Russell Kirk, if there's been one person who has had the greatest influence on my thinking, it was the late Russell Kirk, who you may not know, particularly young people may not be aware. He's essentially the intellectual father of modern conservatism. He writes a book entitled The Conservative Mind that a young man at Yale, but he was at Yale, William F. Buckley reads. He starts a magazine called National Review. He writes God and Man at Yale. And the rest is history. I met Dr. Kirk in 1991 when I was running a small policy group in Indiana. We had him down for a speech. He would pass away within a year or two of our breakfast. But there we were at the Holiday Inn in Columbus, Indiana, over breakfast, scrambled eggs. And I looked at Russell Kirk, because I was still fairly new in my conservative thinking. And I looked at Russell Kirk, the intellectual father of the modern conservative movement, and truthfully, Stephen, I looked at him and I said, so how would you describe yourself? I said, are you a conservative? Are you a neoconservative? Are you a libertarian? And Russell Kirk looked at me the way sometimes older men look at younger men and said, I'm a conservative. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, I wrote a whole book about it. I'm going to send you the book. And he did. I still have it to this day. But I think when Russell Kirk was writing about the moral order, and that's from a term from another one of his books, I think it begins with the fact that whatever your beliefs, or if you have no beliefs in the transcendent. Number one, we've already established you have every right to hold the view. The freedom of conscience is at the very core of the American experiment. But our nation was founded on the belief that we believed, our founding generation believed, we were endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. And it was a history-splitting idea that essentially looking at the most powerful sovereign on earth, from whom all the authority in England proceeded, they said, rights don't come from you, they don't come from legislatures, they come from God. And I think beginning there, that's not every American has to ascribe to that view, but America ascribes to that view. And in my judgment, that's a place, whatever your tradition or no tradition at all, to acknowledge that is the beginning, at least, of being on the journey as a conservative and who seeks to conserve and preserve what's best to this nation. So for me, that really truly is where it begins, and that those rights that were endowed are the unalienable rights of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness.
Very good.
Come from above.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. So I know that a huge amount of your energy now and thinking and conversations are devoted to reimagining and reasserting conservatism. And in your essay, the one that I just mentioned from just a few months ago.
Well, I ran for president a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Not so where you'd notice.
Yeah.
Right.
You take on as the main person, the kind of people that you're talking to, populists, primarily from the right, I think. And a couple of the positions, or three of the positions that you really are kind of Reagan conservatism, right? One is a more robust role for America in the world than the current populist right, I think, asserts. That comes through in your support for the unjust war in Ukraine. Another is global trade. You think we should not be economically isolationist, and then low regulation. And I want to ask about the first two, in that I'll play a little bit the right populist for a couple of minutes. And
this should be good.
Yeah. And say that, well, why we're winning, why our right populist views are ascendant, is that we ran that experiment, you guys, and I think a lot of people in the room probably are closer to your policy positions than they are to the current right, I mean the center-left positions. I think the right populists, we tried that, and it didn't work out well. And so J.D. Vance, in an important interview, says, look, Kamala Harris is my least favorite candidate. This is way before she was running. Is my least favorite candidate because she's the one that's most likely to get us into more stupid wars. And I think he would think, well, the kind of Reagan conservatism has a tendency to get people into stupid wars. And then on the economic, on the globalization front, I think the right populist would say, well, we tried that. And the result of that has been inequality, and then all people, but especially people in the Midwest and deindustrialized cities who don't have a college degree, their life expectancies are decreasing. While all you guys with a college degree, you're doing fine with globalization. And then so how would you respond? How does your brand of conservatism respond to the right populist that says, we've got a better answer, and you got to give us a try because we tried your answer and it didn't pan out?
That's a great summary.
How'd I do as the right populist?
I thought very good. Look, this is an important debate within the ranks of people that ever vote Republican. I mean, our administration in our 4 years embraced America's role as leader of the free world. We stood with our allies, stood up to our enemies. We rebuilt our military. We cut taxes, rolled back regulation, but we negotiated the largest trade deals in American history. We expanded trade and exports in the country. And what drew me into my brief but memorable campaign back in '23 was that I saw my old running mate and many in our party departing from those core ideals and principles. And it's been the calling of my life. It may win me some plaudits in the room, but I was a Democrat when I started in politics. But listening, and I tell people, you know, I voted for Jimmy Carter, and some people forgivingly will say, everybody voted for Carter in '76. And I tell them, no, I voted for Carter in 1980. And then people walk away. But I started listening to Ronald Reagan. I started hearing the ideals I was raised on. My immigrant grandfather who came into this country through Ellis Island, my combat veteran father from the Korean War. I just started to hear these ideals and principles. That's what drew me to the Republican Party. I wasn't drawn to Ronald Reagan had a great personality. I had the privilege of meeting him several times. It wasn't his personality that drew me to the Republican Party, it was principles. And the calling of my life has been to with civility, advance and defend those principles. And particularly when it comes to America's place in the world, something I learned traveling the globe as vice president was that if America's not leading the free world's not being led. There is no B team. There's no backup country that steps into that gap. It's only us. And that's why I continue to believe. I traveled to Ukraine just a matter of months after the unprovoked, brutal invasion by Russia 3 years ago. I returned to Kiev 2 years ago, met with President Zelensky and soldiers in the field. I've continued to maintain whatever the diverse views in our own party, that America must continue to provide Ukraine with the resources they need to defeat and repel the Russian invasion. and that it's in our interest and the interest of the free world. Now, some will say the forever wars thing. I had some people wag their finger at me. Somebody used to be a commentator on Fox News at 8 o'clock in the evening. We were at a forum in Iowa, and he brought up the World War III thing. And I tell people, look, we have a lot of challenges at home. We did then, we still do. But anybody that thinks that we can't solve our problems here at home and still be leader of the free world's got a pretty small view of the greatest nation on earth. We've been doing both for more than 75 years, and we can continue to do both. But the other part about World War III is I often say to people, anybody who thinks that yielding to the ambitions of a rapacious dictator in Eastern Europe will lead to World War III needs to study World War II a little bit more. I mean, it was isolationist voices, frankly, in my political party in the 1930s that said America has no interest there. And the millions of lives lost in World War II, the price that America paid to win a victory for the free world, is to our undying credit. But in my judgment, Vladimir Putin will not stop until he's stopped. And it's the reason why I've continued to advocate for that. On the trade issue, I have a slightly nuanced view. In our administration, we used tariffs and the threat of tariffs to lower trade barriers, to negotiate opening up of markets. I will tell you right now, I was speaking to some agricultural leaders yesterday out in the heartland, and our farmers are hurting right now.
Yeah.
Really hurting. And the bailouts that are being talked about in Washington, D.C. will be a pittance of the losses that family farmers are facing because of the tariffs and restrictions on trade and exports that have followed Liberation Day. So my argument is though this. Look, when it comes to China, we put $250 billion in tariffs on China. They came to the negotiating table in early 2020. We signed what came to be known as a Phase 1 trade deal. I think you can't be tough enough on China to get them to join the family of nations, to end intellectual property theft, to end the trade abuses. But when it comes to free nations, my view is free trade with free nations. Our goal ought to be, with free societies around the world, is we'll lower our trade barriers and subsidies. You lower your trade barriers. And I hold the view that goes all the way back to The Wealth of Nations and Adam Smith's classic book published in 1776 that trade means jobs. It creates prosperity. The Governor Holcomb and I were privileged to lead, I think per capita, the second leading exporting state in the country. Indiana's a place where what we make, what we grow, we sell to the world. And so opening up markets creates and sustains jobs in the heartland as it does all across America, and I'll continue to make that case.
Yeah, thank you for the nuance about the use of tariffs. It's incredibly helpful.
Free trade with free nations. Yeah. That's my line.
Excellent. So we've talked about two small topics, God and conservatism. I have only two more on that I wanted to raise before the Q&A. And so my third topic is a small one, democracy. Perhaps more than anyone else in the U.S. government or in the country at the time, you had a front row seat on January 6, 2021. In my view, you acted with incredible honor and courage. You were maybe one of less than half a dozen people who assured the peaceful transfer of power in that moment. And I, for one, am deeply grateful for what you did that day.
Thank you.
Now, you said that what the lesson of January 6th is that our institutions are strong and resilient. But I'm not so sure. Looking into 2026 and 2028, I see what some of the things that have happened with the redistricting fights, with federal requests for voter information, for a lot of talk that cast doubt on the integrity of voting machines and vote by mail. And I see the possibility, if it's an ordinary midterm election, the incumbent party will, on average, lose some seats in Congress. And it's pretty close. And my nightmare scenario is that that happens, but there's enough pressure from Republican political leaders so that the winners, the Democratic winners in the House in 8, 10, 15 seats are not seated. That's my nightmare scenario in 26. And if that happens, that will be a serious setback for American democracy. I think political scientists would say that we would, in that eventuality, no longer be free and fair democracy as such. We would be something else. So talk me down. Are our institutions sufficiently resilient so that I don't have to worry about that hair on fire? And if there's some chance that what I just suggested might come true or some version of it, what would you advise the people in this room and people in Washington and people in state capitals to do so that they could do a little bit of what you did in performing your duties to the Republic?
Well, first, let me say I'm deeply humbled by your encouraging words and by the affirmation of so many here. I'll always believe it was by God's grace that I did my duty that day. The Bible says he keeps his oath even when it hurts. And I know something about that. But for me, that's what it came down to that day. Almost 4 years to the day earlier, I had taken an oath, standing in the cold, January of 2017, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. It was a promise that I made to the American people. It's a promise that I made ending with a prayer. So help me God. And I'll always believe that we did our duty that day, to see to the peaceful transfer of power under the Constitution of the United States. But I do believe it was a day of tragedy that, thanks to the courageous efforts of law enforcement, the violence was quelled. And what was a day of tragedy, as I said that day, became a triumph of freedom. Because as the world watched, our Congress reconvened the very same day and completed our work in the peaceful transfer of power. I've traveled a bit internationally over the last 4 years, and I can confirm that many around the world were watching.
Yes.
And I think they saw the resilience of our institutions and the strength of our institutions. And I have confidence in the days ahead that Republicans and Democrats will hew to those roots and to that duty. And I also have great confidence in the American people. You know, I told you I was over at the National Archives,
yeah.
And it's hard to read the Constitution. A lot of it's fairly faded. And some parts of it people would like to fade. It's all still there.
But it's there.
But the words you can read right at the top, clear as a bell, even through the filtered glass, are "We the people." We the people. And my confidence, other than my faith in God, about the future of this country ultimately comes from my confidence in the American people. Because as I've traveled around the country the last 4 years, and I've been very humbled at how many people from different backgrounds, different walks of life, different political persuasions have felt the need to express a generous word of encouragement to me. And I know the people of this country love our Constitution. I know they will hold elected officials at every level to that standard in the days ahead. And that's where my confidence comes.
Thank you very much. I completely agree. A friend of mine says there's no democracy without small d Democrats, and that's a confidence in the American people that they'll do the right thing at the end of the day. Okay, so this is the last question before Q&A.
That's what Winston Churchill said. Did you ever hear that quote?
Yes, democracy is the worst system except for all the rest.
No, Churchill was asked why he was always confident that the American military would come in
Oh.
to World War II. And he said, now his mother was an American, so we let him get away with this. Winston Churchill said, a careful study of American history shows
I know this.
that after they've exhausted every other possibility, the American people always do the right thing.
I agree with that one also. So last question, and this is an engagement between, I think you may share with some of the populist right, and I agree with part of the diagnosis that's different from some students at Harvard and especially at the Kennedy School. So in your national affairs essay, one thing that you write is that, lost my notes here.
Good.
Is on the question of big government.
Okay.
And you say, well, progressives, you offer a critique. You say progressive, they've supported a set of policies that have created a government that's too big, but one of the really noxious parts of that is a set of technocrats, unelected bureaucrats, technocratic elites who think that they know better than other people, who talk down to them. And talking down is one thing, but these people make policy. They make regulations, they implement things, and they do it despite and over other people because they think they know better and they're not elected. Now, many people at the Kennedy School aim to be that thing. And so my question for you is, what would your advice be?
No offense.
Yeah. But they could be better. I believe that they could be better. I try to practice that in my teaching. What would your advice be to the technocrat and the bureaucrat to be better on your critique?
Well, I don't necessarily, look, if you doubt that that's the case, talk to any small business owner anywhere across the country who's had to deal with an avalanche of federal regulations. Talk to any farmer that had to be told that a drainage ditch on their farm was now federally regulated waterway, and all the enormous expenses that come with that. But let me go a little bit easier on
the Kennedy School graduate.
on government employees. I'll tell you, there's a lot of people that serve in our nation's capital and in offices around the country that are sincere and well-meaning. But in my opinion, one of the most significant Supreme Court decisions in the last 50 years was not the one you might think that I think, although I do believe that. But it's a decision by the Supreme Court to overturn Chevron deference. I mean, this was about 50 years in the making, where the Supreme Court had ruled that when the Congress passes a law, however vague, if the agency produces regulations and those are challenged by an American citizen, that the courts have to defer to the regulators as being the proper interpretation of the law. And I think that gave way too much power to the administrative state. Justice Neil Gorsuch, who I came to know through the nomination process, is probably if you want to read more about this, you could read his book on the administrative state. And I think I have to suspect, I wasn't in the room, but I have to suspect Justice Gorsuch was a driving force on the Supreme Court majority to overturn the Chevron precedent. And although the results have not been dramatic yet, I believe in time they will be, in two ways. Number one, it levels the playing field between the American citizen, whether they're in the city or on the farm, and the bureaucracy, and says we can go into the courts of this country and I can challenge your interpretation of what Congress passed. The other thing that I think is even more significant, and you've got I know he recently retired from a storied career in journalism in Washington. Dan Balls is here. You could give him a warm applause and welcome for Harvard. But Dan might agree with me that Congress has been shuffling off too much of its responsibility to the bureaucracy, to some extent to the executive branch. And I think that Supreme Court decision is going to require that when Congress passes a law, they have to be much more specific if they want it to be implemented in a particular way. And I think that will invigorate the separation of powers and ultimately serve our nation's interest.
Thank you very much. I think we have different positions on Chevron deference, but I think we're agreed that
I was going to guess.
that regulation and the bureaucracy needs to be fixed. Thank you very much. So we have plenty of time for questions for Vice President Pence. Please come to the microphones. There should be 4, 2 on upstairs and 2 on the floor here. Please introduce yourself. 3 things. Please introduce yourself and your name and your Harvard affiliation. 1 question per customer, please. And remember, very important, questions end in a question mark. Over here, the gentleman in the green sweatshirt.
Great. Hello. Oh, my goodness. I'm Hyunsu. I'm an undergraduate sophomore here at the college. And thank you so much for that, JFK Forum Vice President. I just wanted to ask you, around 1 hour ago, the Harvard Crimson broke the news that President Trump stated that he has made a deal with Harvard. This figure seems to be around $500 million. As a South Korean citizen, a research assistant here at the Kennedy School, and an undergraduate, this does affect me in 3 ways, and so many other people in this room. And I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on that as someone you've worked with President Trump for the past years? Thank you.
Well, not the last year. Look, I am not familiar with the news story. I am hopeful that issues have been resolved. And I won't comment on the details of it. But I will tell you, there can be no tolerance in America for anti-Semitism on our campuses or in our public squares. And I appreciate the fact that Harvard conceded that there was an issue they had to deal with. And I, for my part, welcomed the efforts of the administration on that specific issue to call on not only this institution, but other institutions of higher education around the country to address it. So, but my hope is that issues have been resolved. We rely on our research universities, whether it's in Indiana or storied institutions like Harvard and others, for an enormously important part of our national life. And my hope is that there can be substantive and principled agreement reached so that we can move forward with the kind of support that will continue to underwrite the vital work of research universities around the world, around this country.
Great,
Thank you.
Is there a microphone over here on the floor?
I think he's got one.
Oh, there you are. Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Thank you for being with us, Mr. Vice President. My name is Malik. I'm a second-year student at the business school.
Hi, Malik.
My question to you, this is not an indictment, but rather a friendly observation. You started by saying that you are first a Christian, second a conservative, and finally a Republican. There was no mention of first being an American. Mm-hmm. As the child of Lebanese immigrants, I've seen personally how sectarian politics can ruin a nation. Given the current level of polarization and political vitriol that we experience in this country, how, in your opinion, can we reestablish a sense of civility and patriotism in this nation and get past the identity politics that have crippled us?
Well, thanks. A very thoughtful question. And when I describe my priorities, I call them the numerator. The denominator is I'm an American. And I hope people that knew me in Congress or dealt with me in all of my various roles know I have no other view. But I think it begins with civility. I know that sounds a little Pollyannish, but it's not. I mean, with regard to violence, look, I'm still heartsick about Charlie Kirk's assassination. I got to know Charlie in his early 20s when he was just getting started. He's a fine young man. He literally died trying to add to an open debate in the country, and I believe that must be his legacy, that we continue to look for forums just like the Harvard Kennedy School is doing today. But before that, I also want to say that when you think of the tragedy of Charlie Kirk, when you think of the attack on Governor Shapiro and his family that could have cost lives, you think of the assassination attempts on President Trump and the unspeakable violence visited on the former Democratic leader in Minnesota, that I think first and foremost, we've got to get back to the notion of personal responsibility. I hesitate to put the whole country on trial because of the despicable and cowardly acts of one person. And it's one of the reasons why I've held the view for some time that when it comes to mass shootings, and we could add political violence to that, given the importance of political discourse in the life of our nation, that we ought to think about the notion that justice delayed is justice denied. And that we ought to look to don't compromise due process, right? All the way to habeas corpus. But I hope that the person that pulled the trigger and assassinated Charlie Kirk's meets justice in months or a few short years and is not languishing in a prison 25 years from now, when my little granddaughters are getting ready to go to college. So that's kind of first is personal responsibility. I think we need to recognize that. But beyond that, yes, I think those of us in public life have an obligation to fight hard for what we believe in. I don't think there's anything that, whatever your politics are, whatever the politics are, you don't need to water down what your principles are and your values are, but the way you carry yourself. Being in public life has public responsibilities. And I hold the view that disagreeing without being disagreeable, recognizing, as I've tried to in my 20-year career, that negative personal attacks have no place in public life. I think it contributed, at least in my life, to relationships that endure to this day. One of my favorite anecdotes, and I don't mean to go on, but it's such an important question. The late John Lewis was an aide-de-camp to another one of my heroes, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. John Lewis came to national prominence on Bloody Sunday when he was nearly lost his life being beaten traveling across the bridge in Selma, Alabama. His courage inspired the passage of the Civil Rights Act, and he would go on to serve in Congress. I arrived in Congress knowing who he was and admiring Dr. King my whole life. And I started to listen to his powerful eloquence on the floor. We got in some debates. I don't think John and I agreed on anything, except I knew he was a great man. And he found in me a shared foundation of our Christian faith that we could connect on. And over the course of the years, we became good friends. In 2010, he invited me and my family to walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama on the anniversary of Bloody Sunday. It's one of the highest honors I've ever had in my life. And John and I found opportunities to work together on issues. But it was because it all began with a foundation of mutual respect. And the last thing I would say about this is, you get 15 miles out of Washington, D.C., the people in this country actually get along pretty well. I mean, I like to say we just got to have government as good as our people again. Yeah. I mean, in Indiana, I expect in Massachusetts, I expect where you're from, people live next door to people that don't agree with their politics, right? People go to church and synagogue and other places of worship with people they don't see eye to eye with. They get along just fine. And I think you're going to see the American people make that demand in the days ahead of people in public life at every level, and it'll be part of the solution.
Thank you.
That was a great question.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah, one of the questions I often ask in these is, like, for you, it would be, who's your favorite Democrat, and who's your favorite? And oftentimes people can't come up with an answer, but John L. Lewis is a fantastic
I like that you said Hoosier.
Up here, the woman on the balcony. Yeah.
Thank you. My name's Caitlin. I'm a freshman at the college studying government. First of all,
congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you again for being here with us today. I'm curious, where do you think the future of conservatism is going to take us? Do you think that the Republican Party will ever kind of revert back to traditional views, or do you think this new age of Trump politics is going to continue into 2026, 2028, and beyond?
I've got a very strong opinion on this, Caitlin. And we'll find out in the years ahead if I'm right. I think President Trump has, as presidents have the prerogative to do as the leader of their party, I think he's changed the agenda of the Republican Party in certain respects, notably in the area of protectionist policies and tariffs. But also, I welcome the president's strong action on Iran, strong support for Israel. I'm hopeful the deal that was put on the table yesterday is accepted by Hamas within the 72 hours they've been given. And I'm also encouraged that the president's come around on Ukraine. It seems like he's gotten to a better place than early in the administration. But I stipulate that there are voices around the administration that would take our country in a different direction on the world stage, a different direction on issues like trade. So they've changed the agenda of the Republican Party, but Caitlin, I don't think they've changed the Republican Party. I travel enough around the country, and if I got a ball cap on, I'm pretty anonymous. But if people see the white hair, they spot me. I have people come up to me all the time and say, I agree with your philosophy. Fiscal responsibility, limited government, pro-growth, American leadership in the world. So I tend to think that anybody that ever considers voting Republican still holds those same common sense, traditional conservative views, and that when the next presidential election comes along, there'll be a fulsome debate. And the men and women that I think will best articulate those things will I think, be in a position to lead our party back to that foundation. And I don't say that because I think it's good for the Republican Party, although I think it is. I say that because I think those policies from the Reagan administration forward have proven that they're policies that make America prosperous and strong and free and benefit everyone in the country. So I think we'll be back to it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Young man in the balcony on the left side there, my left. Yeah.
Thank you so much. My name is Yahya. I'm a first-year MPA in International Development student here at the Kennedy
Great.
School.
Congrats.
Thank you. The university that I graduated my undergrad from calls itself the Harvard of Pakistan, so that's something we have in common.
Good man.
I've always wanted to ask sort of an American leader how you deal with the weight of knowing that the decisions you make are, of course, they have a profound impact on 300 million Americans, but also a very deep impact on the lives of pretty much every one of the billions of people who are on this earth. You've talked a lot about responsibility and morality, and I wonder how you deal with that burden, if at all.
Well, for me, and not to be redundant, but it's something the Bible recounts a prayer that Solomon prayed when he became king, when he was a man about your age. And he said, "Give me a discerning heart to distinguish between right and wrong, for who is able to govern this great people of yours?" I prayed that prayer more times than I can possibly remember. Not just when I was vice president, but when I was a governor and had the singular executive responsibility that bore upon people's lives. But when you're at the national level, in the most powerful nation on earth, you're exactly right. Decisions that we make in America, the example we set in America, has repercussions around the world to either embolden people that believe in freedom and liberty and human rights, or embolden people to think the other. And for me, it was always about trying to be discerning, trying to be thoughtful, and as vice president, to offer the best and candid counsel to the president that I could. Now, it may come as a surprise to some about hearing me talk about giving counsel to the president because I read an essay by Walter Mondale right after I was elected vice president, in which he said, everyone that comes into the Oval Office is asking the president for something. And it cannot be that way with the vice president. You cannot be one more person asking the president for something or lobbying him. He said, the vice president owes the president his opinion once and in private. And with very few exceptions, and there were a few, not just at the end, I gave the president my opinion straight and in private, and then respected the decision that he made. But I always tried to bring that heart of concern that you expressed so eloquently to all the counsel that I offered.
That's terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you. The man on my left, on the floor microphone.
Hi.
Hi, Vice President Pence. My name is Krishan. I'm a first year at the college and a fellow Hoosier, of course.
Come on. Congrats.
Thank you. My question is a simple one. You've spoken at length about sticking with your own conservative agenda in the midst of the GOP straying to what you called the siren song of populism. But I was wondering, in terms of your own beliefs, what has been your most substantial change of opinion, viewpoint, or perspective over the past decade, and why?
Good. Got some pretty smart students here, huh?
Well, we shouldn't let Hoosiers ask questions. Over the last decade, that would include when I was in office and the rest. I think I've become much more concerned about the state of the world. I've met President Xi. I've spoken to him privately. I've met Vladimir Putin. I talked to him face to face, told him things he didn't want to hear. And I think over the last 10 years, I've become more convinced. It was simply something of a peace dividend after the Reagan years. The Soviet Union collapsed. There was a lot of talk about we'd come to the end of history, that now we were moving into a whole new era.
We didn't need this
in world
military,
affairs.
Yeah.
I think I've gotten a different view of that. I think we're living in a very perilous time where America needs to be strong. We need to be ready. We need to stand with our allies, and we need to make it clear to enemies of freedom that, as President Kennedy said, that we will bear any price, bear any burden, pay any price to ensure the survival of liberty. But my son's a major in the United States Marine Corps, and one of my unworthy son-in-laws is a lieutenant in the United States Navy. And so this is just a tad bit even more personal for me. I think we stay strong, we stay unwavering, make it clear to people that we're going to defend our interests and our allies in the world. We got a shot at a peaceful future. Failing that, I think the second half of the 21st century could look a whole lot more like the first half of the 20th century.
Thank you. I think we got time for just one more question on the microphone over on my right.
Sweet, thank you. Hi, I'm Mike. My name's Robbie. I'm a Kennedy Scholar from the UK. Last week, Donald Trump told the UN that climate change is a hoax. Back in July this summer, though, Pope Leo, in response to climate deniers, urged Christians to pray for the conversion of many people inside and outside of the church who still do not recognize the urgency of caring for our common home. Like Pope Leo, are you praying for Donald Trump's environmental awakening?
Am I praying for what?
Donald Trump's environmental awakening. Environmental awakening.
Well, look, the Earth is warming, but I would say to this generation, we need to think really carefully about causation. Because while it's undeniable over the last century, the climate of the Earth has been rising, small and in incremental ways. I'm not yet convinced that the prescription that's been advocated by climate activists at the UN or across this country will A, address the problem, and B, not work an enormous hardship on the United States. I mean, the Paris Climate Accords that our administration came out of was one of the most imbalanced international treaties that I ever saw, and I was on the International Relations Committee for 12 years. I mean, it essentially had the United States embracing emission standards in a matter of a few short years when China and India and Russia were a decade and a half away before they even had to begin to reduce emissions. I would tell you there's also an alternative to reducing CO2, because this may surprise you. During our 4 years, by promoting innovation and new sources of energy in this country, we actually reduced carbon emissions more than the Paris Climate Accord required. But we did it through the power of the free market, the power of the marketplace. And I think at the end of the day, that's the right solution for your generation that cares very deeply and admirably about the environment. But I think asking the question, what is the right antidote? And I think a free market, respect for private property, promoting innovation across the West, introducing alternative sources of energy that are clean, like I'm a big champion of nuclear energy that produces no emissions at all, will get there a lot more reliably than, yeah, thanks. We'll get there a lot more reliably than through government mandates and controls and international treaties that ultimately could cost Americans greatly. But congratulations on being at Harvard. It's great.
Thank you very much.
More? How about one more?
You want to do one more?
Why not?
All right, let's do one more.
Oh, thank you so much, Mr. Vice President. Actually, we met really briefly at Billy Graham Jr.'s when his statue was opened at the Capitol.
Oh.
But sorry, so my question is...
That was my first time back at the Capitol.
Say what your name is and
sorry,
your affiliation.
Yes. I'm Emmanuel Caracheo. I'm a first year at the college. So my question
Congratulations.
was... Oh, thank you, sir. So my question was recently, or this past election, Donald Trump, he won demographics that were typically liberal, right? Like particularly the Hispanic vote, right? Mm-hmm. Or he got 45% of the Hispanic vote and a very similar percentage of the young people vote. So my question was, when we think about the future of American conservatism and the Republican Party, should we embrace the issues that made these typically liberal demographics turn Republican, or do you think their turning Republican was inevitable?
It's a great question.
Oh, thank you,
by the
sir.
way. Where are you from?
Laredo, Texas.
Oh, great.
Oh, Texas.
Because I was thinking of Texas.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah.
I'll never forget. It was the day after the election, 2020. And the governor of Texas called me. He said, I couldn't reach the president. We had a lot going on. And he said, Governor Abbott called me up. He said, I just got to call somebody to tell him. And I said, okay. And he said, you guys won the 4 counties on the southern border of Texas. And I said, well, okay. We weren't really in a good spot, right? And he goes, no, you don't understand. He said, these are overwhelmingly Hispanic communities that he said, frankly, as Republicans, we just try and not lose them by a lot. And you guys won them. And I said, well, that's very encouraging to me. And he and I chatted about it for a little while. But it makes sense to me if our party stays hewing to our roots. You know, conservatism, the founder of our party, Abraham Lincoln, said, what is conservative but the belief in the tried and true over the new and untested? The foundation of the Republican Party, I would say, is equality of opportunity. I mean, the 16th president rose to national prominence to make the words, all men are created equal, real in the law. And he died for it. but he changed us to a more perfect union that we're still working on to this day. I think the legacy of the Republican Party has to be equality of opportunity. We have to be the party that says we're going to promote policies that will improve the security, prosperity, job opportunities, and strength of families from every community in the country. And I think that's what broke through with the Hispanic community. We made extraordinary progress. I'm very proud of with the African American community, and I really do believe that that it's those principles, those ideals, and to no less extent values, putting a priority on family, putting a priority on life, religious liberty that also drew many people to that equation. So I don't think it's about changing our agenda, but it's about for those of you in the room who might ever consider voting Republican or being elected as a Republican, I just think we've got to, as a party, we've got to go to every community in the country. We've got to tell our story to every community in the country because these ideals that we advance will resonate everywhere. And I think that's what explained the progress that we made and the progress that we still can make.
Thank you.
Great question.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, in closing, I'd just like to take a minute for everyone to reflect on the conversation that we just had and what we accomplished here together. So, Vice President Pence was extremely generous in sharing your insights, a great and honorable public servant, and we learned a lot from that. But I think even more importantly, we had a conversation across very different political views, and as you say, the thing that's important is civility and learning and exchange. I think people walk away with very different views, but hopefully a deeper understanding of each other, maybe a sharper understanding of where we differ, but maybe also clearer insight on where we agree, and hopefully a few people learned something as well. And I really deeply believe that unless we get better at exercising those muscles as a country, as Americans, but perhaps all over the world, that is the first best and perhaps most important source of our democratic flourishing. So thank you very much, Vice President Trump. Pence, will you ever forgive me?
Thank you, Professor Pence.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. God bless you.